Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Today, I bring you a tale of two competing fantasy role-playing games, D&D and Palladium. It occurred to me a little bit ago, so this is like a brand new thesis of mine. Feel free to poke holes in it all you want in the comments below after finishing the video. But, you know, I feel like a lot of the current political divisions that are afflicting Dungeons and Dragons in particular, as much as there is like an honest like feedback loop from the American bipolar party system, I think a lot of the essential source of the agitation really kind of comes down to how monsters and NPCs are depicted in Dungeons and Dragons and by use of stat blocks. And I'm going to compare it to something that works, that kind of pleases everyone, potentially, and how Palladium does their NPCs and monsters by comparison. Stat blocks inevitably convey a sense to some people of like, this is it. This is the one way you can have a goblin. They all have these stats, they all have these hit points, they all have these talents, they all have these skills, they all have the same alignment, they all function in the same way. You know, you have, in the case of goblins, you have like multiple subtypes of goblins, but they're all kind of rooted in place. Deep in the DMG towards the back, there's like 1 or 2 pages about like how you can, you know, customize various, you know, generic template type NPCs, you know, like your guards, your regular average knights, your regular average nameless priest, by like just kind of laying a simple version of one of the monster race templates over that. You know, you can give them kobold stat adjustments and give them kobold abilities, and now you have a kobold priest instead of just one of the kobolds that's to be found in this. But like, I don't know, the stat blocks are here for convenience. One of the things that's nice about D&D, that it's really easy to run encounters on the fly that just kind of crop up out of nowhere, especially if you're using random tables, pre-published random tables especially. And it also just like streamlines the amount of time it takes for you to prepare adventure materials for a session in terms of mapping out what the encounters are going to be and who's going to be where and what and all that kind of good stuff. D&D streamlines the fuck out of that. But because of the fact that you're allowing it to streamline it by using the pre-made hard writ stats that are to be found in, you know, this book and Volo's Guide and Mordenkainen's and blah blah blah, it does kind of in the end create like a narrower experience for everyone, in a sense that like I said, like this is it. This is all goblins are this, all dragons are this, all humans are this, kind of a thing going on. But like I said, this is just supposed to be a convenience. I prefer using like the archetype templates that are towards the back of these books as opposed to typically the monster race stats, and just do the thing from the DMG of just, you know, like if you want a more civilized depiction of goblins, and you use the generic civilized templates and then give them goblin adjustments, and now you have goblin guards and the goblin nobles and goblin whatever. So like, people are getting these sorts of impressions. It's somewhat like, you know, the DM's fault, but people, it's natural, it's human nature, it's actually a basic law of physics that you seek the lowest energy cost pathway to get to your goal. And so if your goal is to run a session of D&D, and it's way quicker and easier just to use the plug and play stat blocks instead of going through the trouble of giving everything, you know, like their own distinct and unique individual character and flavor. Everyone's got their own name. It's kind of like, are you going to take the Robert E. Howard Conan approach, where you're just riding by the castle and they just say castle? And, oh, Conan's got to fight his way past a couple of guards to get into the castle, and that's basically all it's described as. Well, that's that. The castle and the guards in that are like your stat blocks from here. But, like, if you want to go more George R.R. Martin, where, like, the castle is described down to every last little crenulation and how many minarets it has and all that kind of shit, and what does the drawbridge smell like in the rain and everything else, and that each guard, you get a full description of their outfits, you know their name, you know, like one of them's descended from a great grandfather who wrestled a bear one time in the woods and ripped off its paw to get at a thorn or some kind of shit like that. You know, like you can do that with D&D. Just it doesn't even take that much work. Really, like prime example is the Palladium system, the Palladium Fantasy. Like I just use that as an example since it's the closest to D&D in concept, but it's true of like all of Palladium's games. They don't give you standard stat blocks at all. In many ways, there's a lot of things about Palladium games that, despite like people having like these odd controversies about like some of the ways some of the villains and riffs in particular are treated. I know in the past people like complained that there's too much American symbolism on Heroes and limited cover and all that kind of stuff, but like in so many ways, like Palladium kind of pre-addresses a lot of the stuff that kind of bothers people essentially about the stereotypes presented in Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, you know, does no one remember the 90s? Like everyone's like so like fixated on D&D nowadays that it's like, despite the fact that we have a renewed interest in all these old school games, it's like as far as the subculture's consciousness is concerned, like we just kind of have forgotten that we already have been through all this. Like there are a whole bunch of games, you know, were written and during the 1990s and up to the early 2000s, you know, right before the Elder Scrolls basically and video games in general just kind of destroyed, you know, tabletop role playing, probably more than anything else. Maybe just kind of just burn out on the genre, but like all this stuff's been addressed. Like Palladium has you know, like orcs and goblins and all sorts of like evil everything in the way Palladium is written up is like it'll give you, okay, they're generally in this alignment category, but even then, like the ones that are like typically almost always evil, there's variation in what kind of flavor of evil it is, up to including the honorable kind, the manageable, heroic, aberrant alignment, and that kind of stuff. Like everything's got variable attributes. You know, like there is no like defined set stock stat block for anything except for specific NPCs that they went to the trouble of actually pre-statting out for you. And, you know, that can be a little bit daunting, perhaps, to some people who, you know, it takes time to, if you're inclined to want to, like, have exact, accurate, specific stats and combat stats for every last single thing that your players might encounter during your game session. You know, like, you're like, rolling up every animal. You'll know every fox and hen and wolf in the forest, like, individually, if you allow yourself to do that. Or you can just make like a generic template for everything on your own and choose your own settings, so that way like it goes with what you think your encounter with an angry chicken in the woods should be like in your fantasy game. Or you can, there's a way to like run it on the fly that I like to use. I like it generally, like, you know, with the Heroes Unlimited adventure I'm running right now. The primary villain, I fully wrote up like a regular character. Did all their stats, everything, figured out all their skills, the whole shebang. Then there's like a second tier of NPCs where basically I just assume average on their stats and just take note of what kind of powers and training they have where that might nudge things up a bit higher. And so I only basically just keep track of the attributes that are above 10 and any bonuses they have from that, and just kind of do a simplified thing. I take note of like what their skill package is, but I don't go through and like try to figure everything out. Like, you know, most skills, you know, are basically start around between 30 and 40%, and then you add 5% per the thing's level for its percentage roll. So it's easy, you know, like it's not that hard to kind of, you know, guesstimate what your average, you know, percentage for their skills should be. So you just go ahead and give them that, you know. Characters, you know, trained in, you know, as paramilitary operations, 60%. That's all you need to write down. And if you want to look up specifically what skills are in there on the fly in the middle of a game because you want to justify something to the players, that's fine. But, you know, they're the ones that need the complex, intimate character sheets so that they know their characters. You don't need to know every last little thing in the world. But it gives you the option to. And I feel like that's kind of important in a way, and something that differentiates it from, you know, D&D's easier to use, but also more rigid. Like, you know, it's kind of a thing of, you can have two people running Palladium Fantasy games, using the exact same mix of races for their players, and a set in the exact same part of the world map, having a fight against, you know, a war between the exact, say, two cities in the Eastern Territories or something like that. And you have a player who's played in both of those separately, and they will have like massively different experiences of everything. The way the creatures will operate when they encounter them, the way the factions will work. Despite both being based on the exact same, you know, world template and history, you'll have radically different experiences, like down to just the basic encounters, just fighting a rat in a sewer or a goblin on a street. Every Palladium Fantasy game is uniquely tailored by that game master who's running it. With D&D, on the other hand, unless you got like a more creative DM who's got more time on their hands to do the things I'm talking about, where you just take the more basic occupational archetypes and then just put whatever racial template you want over that for most of your NPCs, and basically just use the monsters as writ. But if you're you know, using this as intended, because so much volume and attention has been given to the generic stat blocks, and they are convenient. I'm not denying that at all. It's super fucking convenient to use them. But it means that you can have two game masters running the exact same, you know, D&D adventure module. You know, they're both going to run, you know, Baldur's Gate and Hell, Avernus the Fifth, where the hell that one was called, and that player can play in both of those games, and there might be differences in how the storyline goes along, and how those game masters might kind of interpret how to present some of that stuff. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts, the encounters are going to feel exactly the same, because they're both using the identical stat blocks. That's in part why it creates this impression of like, well, that's it. That's what all goblins are like, because everyone's D&D game is using the exact same goblin stats, except for like a kind of a small fringe of people who are playing around more with the concepts. And like I said, though, like, this isn't anything new. We shouldn't be like allowing this to be too controversial. We've known about all this. The 90s already was a response to the last time people kind of got weary of D&D, and we had, you know, all sorts of games that were trying to be like more inclusive in a variety of ways, presenting monster races as playable, having, you know, like more nuance to alignment, if not just kind of removing alignment from the equation and allowing players to kind of freeball it more, all sorts of experimental stuff. I mean, does anyone like remember like Kindred of the Ebony Kingdom? Like, I want to say this was put out like late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere between like 99 and 2001-ish is what I want to remember. You know, it's a good read. Modern day 5th edition Vampire, for all of its pretense of being like more inclusive, completely chops this out of the lore. And like, you have this whole like interesting little subset of, you know, what vampire life in sub-Saharan Africa is like. You know, like real inclusion, not just allowing people to remain minorities within a setting, but actually giving a setting where people are no longer the minority, kind of a thing, you know, like, it's an actual dark horror fantasy Africa, you know, not just allowing, you know, a justification for you to have a black vampire hunter in, you know, Victorian London, you know, kind of a thing. That's more contrived. This gives you a less contrived example of the kind of stuff that was done 20 years ago. You know, like, and everyone's still like screaming about like how horribly stereotyped D&D is. Like, we've known this. Like, quit forgetting the past, guys. Jesus. Like, remember when there's like this, like, I remember this thing, also like maybe mid-2000s, because I want to say it was during the Bush administration, but there's like this sudden controversy about the idea of, you know, unwelcomed encounters with priests in the Catholic Church kind of was making the rounds on the news, and everyone was like, what? Oh my God, I can't believe this is going on, and all the controversy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Haven't we known about this for like 1,000 years? Hasn't anyone read In the Name of the Rose? Oh well, I guess on that note, be sure to stay waspinated, have a good one, and all that good stuff. Hit like and subscribe, leave comments, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a good one.